Welcome to session 1 of Learning to Paint in Watercolours with Maggie Cochrane. In this session I'm going to talk about materials. Probably the most important purchase you will make when you're painting in watercolours is your paper. It's a shame to waste your time and energy working on paper that will not give you good results. Cheap papers will buckle very easily or absorb the paint too quickly. With others like cartridge paper, the paint will just sit on the surface. Choose a reputable brand, somebody like Daler-Rowney, Bockingford. Go for the most expensive that you can afford, because it's a shame if you've used a really cheap paper and you've painted a lovely picture and it just doesn't work because the paper's all buckled up. Paper comes in different weights, so what you're looking for is this. A standard weight of watercolour paper that you want to buy is £140, 300 GSM. The other thing that you need to be aware of with watercolour paper is that there are 3 different surfaces: rough, hot pressed and cold pressed. I usually work on rough paper as it has a nice texture which I like. Hot pressed paper, which is very, very smooth, is a really good paper to use if you like to do very detailed work, if you're a botanical artist, for example. And the other one, cold pressed, is often called NOT, N-O-T, NOT standing for not hot pressed. And it's somewhere between the two, so I would use a cold press sometimes as well. So you're thinking about your weight and you're thinking about your surface. So this one, for example, Bockingford by Winsor & Newton is a good quality paper. It comes in different prices, different sizes. So this one here, £140, it's a good sort of starting weight. Daler-Rowney as well, also very good. They're aquarelle papers, again, the 300 gram. Obviously we're going to need some water. It's called watercolour for a reason. I would always suggest that you have 2 pots so that you can always have one in which you keep clean water and one in which you clean your dirty brush. It's also quite useful to have a little spray, a water spray. I just buy these very cheap ones. I think they're little travel size ones from the chemist, just to be able to spray if you want a little bit of water on your paper. Brushes. Now, I've never been one to spend a lot of money on brushes. You can pay anything from £1 to £100 for water, or even more for a watercolour brush, depending really on whether or not you're getting a natural, like a sable or a squirrel, or whether you're going for a synthetic. I tend to just go for cheap brushes, and then I don't have to feel that I'm too precious about them. It is important to get a brush, though, that's going to hold the water. And if you go very, very cheap, sometimes the hairs will fall out and it just won't hold the water. But again, you know, sort of start out cheap and work your way up. The most common brush that I would use is a round. So this has got a tip, but it will also hold quite a lot of water. And this comes in lots of different sizes. So, you know, maybe a middle-sized one and a big one and possibly a small one as well. Another really useful brush is a flat. So this is very good if you want to get some straight edges. Third brush that I've always got is a rigger. And this is very good if I want to do tree branches, for example, a long thin rigger. You can get fan brushes, you can get these shaped brushes, you can get brushes for doing hedges. There are so many brushes out there, but really sort of start simple and just get a couple. Let's just show you, for example, using a round. With a round brush, I can, a bit more water would help. The round brush I can, depending on how I want to use it, I can do a thick shape or a thin shape. A rigger brush will allow me to do some nice bits like this. A flat brush, oops, that's So a selection, but when you're starting out, it's more important to spend your money on the paper than it is, I think, on the brushes. Paints, and I will talk about paint more in the next session where we'll look at different colours, but basically your paint comes either in a tube or in a palette in little pans. As I say, we'll talk about that more in the next session. Using a palette, so I tend to quite often use one of these sort of palettes where I can squirt out the colours that I want. I've got mixing area and it's all in one place. Or if you're using tubes, you'll need something like this to squeeze your paint out into and to mix. Another thing that's very useful with watercolour is masking fluid. There is no white in watercolour. The only white that you'll get is by leaving the paper white showing through. So if you want to keep some white paper, you can put something like a masking fluid on it, which will protect the paper, and then you peel it off at the end and get the white paper. So I quite often use a blue one, just so I can see where I've put it down. Don't apply your masking fluid with a brush because it will ruin your brush. I would tend to apply it with something like a feather, or you can buy masking fluid pens. So that's us started on our basics, ready to go on the colour.